My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm 27 years old, and what I'm about to share is something I never thought I'd survive, let alone talk about. It's a story about family betrayal and the kind of revenge that changes everything just 3 years ago. My life looked perfect from the outside. People envied my close-knit family, my loving fiancé, and my steady career. But behind closed doors, cracks were forming, lies were being whispered, and a secret was brewing that would shatter my entire world. What happened to me turned the people I loved into strangers and forced me to become someone I never imagined I could be. Stay with me till the end of this video because every detail matters and nothing is what it seems. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story so more people can hear it. This story is written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries. When I think back to how it all began, it's almost laughable how blind I was to the warning signs, but at the time I thought my life was untouchable. I had grown up in a small town in Maine where everyone knew each other's business, and my family, the Whitmores, was practically local royalty, respected for our old bookstore that had been in business for 3 generations, and loved for our involvement in every community event from holiday parades to summer fairs. And being the oldest daughter, I was raised with the idea that loyalty to family came before everything else, even my own dreams. So when my mother got sick 3 years ago, I didn't hesitate to put my plans for a master's degree on hold and move back home to help run the store with my father and younger brother, Ethan, who despite being only 2 years younger had always been treated like the golden boy. I didn't mind. I thought that's just how family worked until the day I overheard a conversation in the back office that didn't make sense to me, something about moving things quietly and no one finding out until it's done. But when I walked in, both my dad and Ethan froze, exchanged a quick glance, and brushed it off as a supplier issue, which I accepted at face value because that's what you do when you trust your family completely. But small things started piling up. Ethan taking mysterious trips to Portland without telling me, Dad locking the office door during business hours, and even my mom, though sick, seemed more tense than usual whenever Ethan was around. And just as I was trying to figure out if I was overthinking, my fiancé Matthew, who had always been my rock since college, started acting distant, claiming long hours at work as an attorney, but avoiding me in subtle ways that I noticed but tried not to confront because I didn't want to seem paranoid. Yet one night, after closing the store alone, I saw his car parked outside the Blue Heron Inn, a place known for discreet affairs, and when I called his phone, he didn't answer, only texting me an hour later saying he was finishing a late meeting. And I wanted to believe him, I really did, but something in my gut twisted so violently that I couldn't ignore it. And that's when I decided to dig not just into Matthew, but into everything around me, starting with the store, because that conversation I overheard kept replaying in my mind. I began staying late, checking the books when Dad wasn't looking, and what I found didn't make sense. There were large amounts of money missing from the business account, replaced by strange deposits from an Michael Cain and name I didn't recognize, and receipts for items we didn't sell, like high-end watches and electronics. And when I confronted Dad about it, he grew defensive, saying I was too stressed and should focus on taking care of Mom, which only made me more suspicious. And the more I looked, the more I realized that the people I trusted most were hiding something huge. Things came to a head one Sunday afternoon when I got a call from the hospital. Mom had been rushed in after collapsing at home, and while I was sitting in the waiting room, Ethan walked in looking rattled, avoiding my eyes, and when I pressed him for details, he just muttered, "Not now, Clara," before disappearing to make a phone call. And later that night, after Mom was stable, I came back to the house to grab some clothes for her, only to find Matthew in the kitchen with Ethan, whispering urgently about the deal and keeping her quiet. And my heart sank because there was no logical reason for my fiancé to be talking to my brother in that tone, let alone about me. And that's when it hit me. They were all connected somehow, Matthew, Ethan, and maybe even Dad, and I had no idea what the deal was, but I knew it was big enough that they were willing to keep me in the dark. And standing there in the hallway, listening to the low murmur of their voices, I realized that my entire life might be built on lies, that the people who were supposed to protect me might actually be the ones I needed protection from. And for the first time in my life, I felt the cold sting of betrayal creeping into my bones. And instead of confronting them then and there, I made a decision, a quiet, dangerous decision, to play along, act normal, and find out exactly what they were hiding. Because if I was going to survive this, I needed proof, leverage, and a plan. And I had a feeling that once I knew the truth, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I barely recognized, methodical, calculating, and willing to do whatever it took to uncover the truth. And I started with the easiest target, Matthew, because if he was connected to whatever Ethan and Dad were involved in, he would eventually slip up, and sure enough, the cracks began to show. One night when he claimed he was working late, I followed him from his office downtown, staying 3 cars back so he wouldn't notice, and instead of heading to the Blue, here on in, he drove to a dimly lit storage facility on the edge of town, the kind with keypad gates and metal units stretching into the dark, and my pulse quickened as I parked across the street, watching him punch in a code and disappear inside Unit 32B, staying for about 20 minutes, before leaving with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and I had no idea what was inside, but something told me it wasn't gym clothes. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I checked his phone and found a string of messages from a number saved as MC with short cryptic lines, like drop confirmed and next shipment Friday. And when I cross-referenced the initials with the name I'd found in the store's financials, M. Cain, it was like a puzzle piece snapping into place, though I still didn't know what the shipments were, only that they were being laundered through my family's bookstore and that Matthew was actively helping them, which made me question every moment of our relationship, wondering if I was ever anything more than a convenient cover. I didn't dare confront him yet because if I showed my cards too soon, I'd lose any chance of figuring out the full scope, so instead, I turned my focus to Ethan, whose behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. He'd disappear for hours, come home reeking of expensive cologne, and keep his phone glued to his hand, like it was an extension of his body, but his arrogance worked in my favor because one evening while he was in the shower, I unlocked his laptop using his predictable password, our dog's name, and his birth year, and what I found made my stomach churn. A series of spreadsheets detailing inventory that had nothing to do with books and everything to do with black market goods, including luxury watches, rare coins, and even prescription medications, all tagged with dates, buyers, and prices that added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the most recent entry had Matthew's initials in the courier column, which confirmed my worst suspicion. They weren't just dabbling in something shady. They were running a full-scale smuggling operation right under my nose, using the bookstore as a front, and Mom's sudden collapse now gnawed at me differently. Had she known? Had she confronted them? The thought made my chest tighten, and I knew that if she had, it might explain the tension I noticed between her and Ethan. My next move was to quietly check the store's security footage. Something Dad had always handled himself, and sure enough, there were missing days, entire weekends where no footage existed, conveniently aligning with big inventory drop dates from Ethan's spreadsheet, which meant they weren't just hiding things from me, they were actively erasing evidence, and that realization lit a fire in me because if I was going to expose them, I'd have to get my own evidence before they could scrub it clean. So I bought a small high-resolution camera online and hid it behind a row of books in the back office, angled toward the desk where Dad handled transactions, and for days I pretended everything was normal, smiling at Matthew, laughing at Ethan's jokes, even hugging Dad when he said I was holding the family together, all while my camera silently recorded every shady deal, every envelope slipped under the desk, every item that didn't belong in a bookstore, and the footage I gathered was damning. Ethan meeting with strangers in hoodies, Dad counting stacks of cash, and once Matthew himself dropping off that same black duffel bag I'd seen at the storage facility. Still, I needed more, something that tied them directly to M. Cain, the mysterious name that seemed to sit at the center of all of this, and my break came on a rainy Thursday night when had seemed to sit at the center of all of this, and my break came on a rainy Thursday night when Ethan left his phone on the counter while grabbing a beer from the garage, and a message lit up the screen. Cain wants to meet midnight, same place. My heart pounded as I memorized the address, an abandoned cannery on the waterfront, and later, while pretending to be asleep next to Matthew, I waited until the house was silent, then grabbed my keys and followed Ethan's truck in the dark, parking a block away from the cannery and slipping inside through a rusted side door. The place smelled of salt water and old machinery, and in the dim light I saw Ethan shaking hands with a tall, sharp-featured man in a tailored coat. M. Cain, I was certain of it, and beside him was Matthew, looking tense but focused, handing over a briefcase that Cain opened to reveal neatly packed rows of small velvet boxes, the kind used for high-end jewelry, and Cain's smile as he counted them sent a chill through me because it wasn't just business, it was personal satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing you own the people you're dealing with. I was recording the whole thing on my phone from behind a stack of crates when suddenly a floorboard creaked under my foot loud enough to echo, and both Ethan and Matthew's heads snapped toward the sound, but I ducked low, holding my breath until Cain dismissed it with a wave, muttering something about rats in the walls, and they went back to their discussion, agreeing on the next phase and moving the bigger pieces soon. Phrases that made my stomach twist because whatever they were planning, it was bigger than anything I'd imagined, and as I slipped out into the rain, my heart was hammering. With a mix of fear and exhilaration, I finally had proof, real proof, but I also knew that if they caught wind of what I was doing, they wouldn't hesitate to silence me, family or not. And as I drove home that night, soaked and shaking, I realized the scale of what I was up against, and that this wasn't just about exposing a crime. It was about dismantling the illusion of my family piece by piece until there was nothing left but the truth, and if that meant destroying them, then so be it. Because somewhere along the way, I'd stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like someone plotting the perfect revenge. From the moment I left that cannery, my mind stopped spinning in confusion and started moving with purpose, every thought sharpening into strategy, and I knew that revenge wasn't just about exposing them. It was about making sure they turned on each other before they ever realized I was the one pulling the strings, because if I went at them directly, they'd circle the wagons and shut me out, but if I could make them doubt each other, paranoia would do half the work for me. The first step was isolating each of them in subtle ways, planting small seeds of mistrust that wouldn't seem connected at first. So I started with Matthew slipping a printed screenshot of one of Ethan's incriminating spreadsheets into his briefcase while he was in the shower, knowing he'd find it during work and start questioning why Ethan had kept such detailed records without telling him. And a few days later, I noticed his sudden coolness toward my brother's short-clipped answers, replacing their usual easy banter. For Ethan, I went with something more emotional. I forwarded an anonymous text to his phone from a law burner app. Saw Matthew talking to Cain without you, thought you should know. Which, judging by the way he glared at Matthew the next time they crossed paths, had exactly the desired effect. And for Dad, I took a risk. Late one night after he'd gone to bed, I placed a single high-end watch, the kind I'd seen in the inventory list, inside the locked drawer of his desk, leaving the key in plain sight. And the next morning, while pretending to look for a receipt, I made sure to accidentally open that drawer right in front of him, letting my eyes linger just long enough for him to know I'd seen it, but not long enough for him to think I'd say anything outright. And I could see the tension in his jaw as he shut it and changed the subject, his mind no doubt spinning about how much I knew. While the seeds of mistrust grew, I kept gathering evidence, my hidden camera at the store capturing a particularly telling exchange where Cain himself walked in broad daylight, no attempt at disguise, and handed Dad a slim manila folder that Dad immediately locked away without looking, which told me two things. Cain wasn't afraid of being seen, and whatever was in that folder was important enough to secure instantly. So that night, after the store closed, I stayed behind under the pretense of reorganizing inventory, picked the lock on Dad's desk with a hairpin, and pulled out the folder, my hands shaking as I flipped it open to find shipping manifests, real ones this time, with date, stock numbers, and container IDs, all tied to high-value goods coming into the state under false customs declarations. And at the bottom of each page, in neat, deliberate handwriting, was the signature Michael Cain. And I knew this was the piece that could link all of them directly to him in a way they couldn't deny. But I also knew I couldn't just hand it to the police, not yet, because if they were arrested together, they might suspect I'd been the leak, and I needed them to self-destruct first. So I made copies of the manifest, slid the originals back into place, and began leaking tiny, deliberate pieces to each of them, tailored to trigger maximum paranoia. For Matthew, the first left a single manifest page in the glove compartment of his car, knowing he'd wonder if Ethan had planted it there. For Ethan, I printed a blurry still from the hidden camera showing Matthew and Cain exchanging the duffel bag, leaving it on his bed while he was out. For Dad, I mailed an unmarked envelope to the store with a copy of one manifest and the words, "They'll know soon," typed across it, because nothing rattles a man like the suggestion of exposure without a clear source. And within a week, the results were exactly as I'd hoped. Matthew stopped coming around the house unless absolutely necessary. Ethan started snapping at Dad in the store, and Dad began calling me sweetheart, a little too often, like he was trying to keep me on his side without knowing whether I was already against him. Meanwhile, Mom was recovering slowly, still weak but lucid enough to notice the tension, and though she didn't ask questions outright, I caught her watching me sometimes, her eyes narrowed in quiet calculation. And I wondered if she suspected I was up to something, if she might even approve. The real turning point came one Friday night when Ethan showed up at my door unexpectedly, his eyes darting, like a man who'd been looking over his shoulder too long, and blurted out, "If Matthew says anything about me, he's lying," which told me everything I needed to know. My plan was working, the cracks were widening, and all I had to do was give them one more shove. So I set the stage for the final phase by sending an anonymous message to Cain himself from the burner number. Meeting compromised, one of them's talking, check the manifests, knowing, but a man like Cain, who clearly ran his operation with precision, wouldn't take betrayal lightly. And the following Tuesday, my camera caught Cain storming into the store, slamming the desk with his palm and demanding to know who had leaked doc info, while Dad stammered Matthew avoided eye contact and Ethan outright denied everything, their voices rising until Cain left abruptly, muttering that he had to clean house. And as soon as the door shut, the three of them turned on each other like cornered animals, accusing, cursing, and making threats that under different circumstances might have broken me to hear, but in that moment I felt a calm clarity. I was winning. Still, I knew that Cain's version of cleaning house probably involved more than angry words, and if I wasn't careful, I could get caught in the crossfire. So I prepared my exit strategy. I gathered all the evidence, video, spreadsheets, manifests, even my recordings from the cannery, and stored them in a cloud folder under a timed email set to send to a trusted contact in law enforcement. If I didn't cancel it within 72 hours, then I cleared the hidden camera from the store, wiped my burner phone, and waited, because I had a feeling that whatever happened next would be explosive, and I intended to be standing far enough away to watch it burn without getting singed. I didn't have to wait long for the final unraveling to begin, because 2 nights after Cain's stormy visit to the store, the sound of sirens woke me from a restless sleep, and though I didn't know exactly what was happening yet, my gut told me this was it. The storm I'd been engineering was about to hit land. Early the next morning, the news confirmed it. A container ship docking at Portland Harbor had been seized by federal agents after an anonymous tip-off, and inside they'd found over $2 million worth of smuggled goods, all linked to a shell company tied directly to Michael Cain. And while Cain wasn't arrested on the spot, the sudden public heat forced him into the shadows, which in turn sent my father, Ethan, and Matthew spiraling. Matthew showed up at my house looking pale and sweaty, muttering about Cain going dark and money being frozen, while Ethan paced the porch like a trapped animal, demanding to know if Matthew had sold them out. And Dad, for the first time in my life, looked small, his voice cracking when he told me not to believe everything I heard, because family sticks together. But there was no family left in the way he meant it now after what they'd done to me, to Mom, to the life I thought I had. So I kept my mask firmly in place, nodding like I was still on their side, even as I scheduled a meeting with Detective Harris, the one contact I trusted from my research, and handed over everything, every recording, every manifest, every spreadsheet, even the footage from the cannery, neatly organized in a binder that laid out the whole operation from start to finish. Harris's eyes widened as he flipped through it, telling me this was enough to bury them, and all I had to do was sit back and watch, which I did with a strange sense of detachment, as over the next week quiet surveillance turned into coordinated raids. Cain was picked up at a private airstrip trying to leave the state. Dad was let out of the bookstore in handcuffs. Ethan was arrested at his apartment, and Matthew, my almost husband, was taken straight from his law office in front of clients and co-workers, his face a mask of disbelief, as if he still couldn't understand how everything had fallen apart so fast. The media feasted on the story of the Whitmore smuggling ring, painting them as a family enterprise gone rotten, but what no one knew, what I never tell anyone except here, is that it wasn't greed or ambition that destroyed them. It was me patiently pulling at the threads until the whole thing collapsed. Mom, when I told her, didn't cry, didn't yell. She just sat back in her chair, took my hand, and whispered, "I always knew you were stronger than them." And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something like peace. Matthew tried to contact me from jail, sending letters that I never opened. Ethan's lawyer sent a request for a private conversation that I ignored, and Dad's betrayal cut the deepest, but watching him avoid my eyes in the courtroom was closure enough. Cain, on the other hand, stared at me once during the hearing with a look that promised he'd remember my face, but by then I'd already taken steps to disappear from his world entirely, selling my share of the bookstore, changing my number, moving Mom to a quiet lakeside town where no one knew our name, and letting the Whitmore legacy rot in the headlines. Revenge, I learned, isn't about rage or even justice, about control, about taking back the power they tried to strip from you and using it to write the ending on your terms. And as I stood on our new porch one crisp autumn morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the water. I realized I'd done exactly that. The people who tried to use me were gone, the truth was out, and the life I had now was mine alone. No shadows, no lies, just the knowledge that if anyone ever tried to break me again, I'd already proven I knew exactly how to break them first. Thanks for listening to my story. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.